The water was supposed to be the problem. That's what everyone kept telling Rebecca Torres as she stood at the edge of the abandoned mine shaft, watching muddy water bubble up from somewhere deep below. What they didn't know was that beneath that water, sealed away for over 8 decades, lay something that would turn the town's biggest joke into its most powerful voice. Before we begin, make sure you smash that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story that will leave you absolutely speechless. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who seemed surprised to find Rebecca's address even existed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. She'd opened it, standing in the doorway of the cramped apartment she shared with her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, the paper quality so fine it felt foreign in her work-roughened hands. We regret to inform you of the passing of Leonard Torres, your paternal grandfather. As his sole surviving heir, you have inherited property located at 2,847 Copper Ridge Road, including all structures and mineral rights therein. Rebecca had read it 3 times before the words made sense. Grandfather. She'd never met the man. Her father had died when she was 2, and her mother had refused to speak about his family beyond vague references to complicated history and people who made their choices. Now this stranger had left her something, and the lawyer's follow-up call made it clear what that something was. A flooded mine shaft on 20 acres of worthless land, complete with $47,000 in back taxes she couldn't possibly afford. Mummy, who was that? Emma looked up from her homework, pencil poised over math problems that would determine whether she stayed in the advanced program next year. Just some mail, baby. Rebecca folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her purse alongside the collection notices she'd been avoiding. How's that homework coming? The truth was simpler and harder than she wanted to admit. She was drowning. 3 years since the divorce. 3 years of Jason's promises to help support Emma turning into silence and excuses. 3 years of working double shifts as a home health aide while watching her daughter's childhood slip away in a series of rushed mornings and exhausted evenings. The inheritance felt like a cosmic joke. Here she was, barely making rent on a 1-bedroom apartment with water stains on the ceiling, and a radiator that clanked like it was threatening mutiny, and someone had left her a flooded hole in the ground, an hour outside Silverton, Montana. But that night, after Emma fell asleep, and Rebecca sat at their scarred kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, curiosity got the better of her. She pulled up property records on her ancient laptop, the one she'd bought refurbished 5 years ago, and nursed along with increasingly desperate prayers to the technology gods. Copper Ridge Road. The address existed on maps, barely. A dirt track winding into hills that had seen better days. A century ago, the property listing showed a main structure described optimistically as a historical cabin, several outbuildings in various states of repair, and the mine shaft itself, marked with warnings about structural instability and water infiltration. The photos were worse than she'd imagined. The cabin looked like it had given up on life sometime during the Reagan administration. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired horse's back. Windows were either boarded up or simply gone, and what had once been a porch now resembled a wooden skeleton picked clean by time and weather. But it was the mine entrance that stopped her scrolling. A timber-framed opening in the hillside, maybe 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide, water pouring out like tears from a wound that wouldn't heal. The listing noted that the flooding had begun in the early 1990 seconds when an underground spring had apparently shifted, turning what had once been a working mine into an expensive problem nobody wanted to solve. Rebecca found herself staring at that image long after she should have gone to bed. There was something about it that pulled at her, some echo of a story she didn't know she was part of. Her grandfather had owned this, had worked it, maybe, or at least held on to it long enough to leave it to her. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Mrs. Chen, her landlord, knocked at 7 a.m. with news Rebecca had been dreading. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. but I need to raise the rent. New property tax assessment came through, and I can't absorb the increase. Mrs. Chen looked genuinely apologetic. Her weathered face creased with concern. $300 more a month, starting next month. $300. Rebecca did the math in her head, while Emma ate cereal and watched cartoons, oblivious to the calculation that would reshape their lives. With the rent increase, she'd be spending 85% of her income on housing alone. There'd be nothing left for food, utilities, Emma's school supplies, the car insurance that was already 2 months overdue. I understand, Rebecca heard herself say, though understanding and affording were two very different things. Can I let you know by the end of the week? After Mrs. Chen left, Rebecca pulled out the inheritance letter again. A flooded mine shaft and a collapsing cabin weren't an answer to anything, but they were something she owned, something that couldn't raise the rent or threaten eviction. The idea formed slowly, the way desperate plans often do. What if they moved there, just temporarily, just until she could figure something else out? The cabin couldn't be worse than what was coming if she stayed here, and at least they'd have space, clean air, a place that was actually theirs. Emma appeared beside her, having abandoned the cartoons for more interesting maternal reconnaissance. "Mommy, why do you look sad?" Rebecca pulled her daughter onto her lap, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Not sad, baby. Just thinking. How would you feel about an adventure?" "What kind of adventure?" Emma's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could muster before 8 a.m. "What if we moved to the mountains? There's a cabin that belonged to your great-grandfather, and it's ours now if we want it." Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Does it have my own room?" "Probably. It's bigger than here. At least. Can we bring Mr. Whiskers?" The stuffed cat she'd had since birth, now more grey than white and missing an eye. "Of course we can bring Mr. Whiskers." "Then okay. When do we go?" If only adult decisions were that simple. Rebecca spent the next 3 days researching, calling, trying to understand what moving to Copper Ridge would actually mean. The cabin had no electricity or running water, both disconnected decades ago for non-payment. The nearest grocery store was 12 miles away. The school district different from Emma's current one. The whole situation, a disaster waiting to happen. But staying meant falling further behind every month, meant watching Emma's opportunities narrow as Rebecca's ability to provide shrank. At least at the cabin, they'd have a roof and land, however worthless everyone seemed to think it was. The decision made itself through elimination of alternatives. Rebecca gave notice at the apartment, withdrew Emma from her current school, and made arrangements to transfer to the rural district near Silverton. She sold everything that wouldn't fit in her 15-year-old Toyota, which meant most of their furniture and half of Emma's toys. The drive to Copper Ridge took 90 minutes through increasingly remote landscape. Emma pressed her face against the window, narrating everything she saw with running commentary that would have been exhausting if it weren't so purely her. "Mommy, look at those mountains. Are they bigger than the ones near our old place? Do bears live in there? Can we see bears? I hope we see bears. From far away though, not in our house. Mr. Whiskers would be scared." The dirt road when they found it was worse than the photos suggested. Deep ruts spoke of spring runoff and years of neglect, and Rebecca's Toyota protested every foot of the journey with creaks and groans that suggested early retirement might be in its future. The cabin appeared through trees, like something from a cautionary fairy tale. Rebecca stopped the car, hands still gripping the wheel, and stared at what was now technically home. "Is that it?" Emma's voice had lost some of its enthusiasm. "That's it, baby. It looks sad." Out of the mouths of children. The cabin looked more than sad. It looked defeated, forgotten, like it was barely holding itself together through habit, rather than structural integrity. The roof situation was worse in person. Several sections clearly compromised by water damage and time. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The porch steps had mostly rotted away, and the front door hung at an angle that defied both aesthetics and physics. Rebecca forced brightness into her voice. It just needs some love. We can fix it up, make it ours. They climbed out of the car, and Rebecca immediately noticed the sound. Water, constant and nearby, the rush and gurgle of liquid in motion. Following the sound around the side of the cabin, they found the mine entrance. The photos hadn't captured the scale of it. Water poured from the opening in a steady stream, muddy and thick, carving a channel through the hillside that had worn smooth over years of constant flow. The timber framing looked solid despite everything, thick beams that spoke of a time when things were built to last. But the water made the whole scene feel inherently unstable, like the earth itself was weeping. "Why is there so much water?" Emma asked, edging closer with the fearlessness of youth. "Stay back from there," Rebecca said sharply, then softened her tone. "There's a spring underground that's flooding the old mine. It's been doing that for a long time. Can we fix it?" Rebecca looked at the relentless flow, mentally calculating costs she couldn't begin to afford. "Maybe someday. For now, we just need to make the cabin livable." The interior of the cabin was simultaneously better and worse than expected. Better because the roof had held well enough in some sections that the main living area was actually dry. Worse because everything else suggested the cabin had been sealed up and forgotten sometime in the 1980 seconds, accumulating decades of dust, mouse droppings, and the specific despair of abandoned places. But there was a wood stove that looked functional, a hand pump in what had been the kitchen that actually produced water after extensive priming, and 3 separate rooms that could provide sleeping space once they were cleared of debris and 30 years of neglect. Rebecca and Emma spent the rest of that first day cleaning, creating small islands of livability in the sea of disrepair. They set up their sleeping bags in the driest room, arranged Emma's remaining toys on a windowsill, and made sandwiches from the cooler Rebecca had packed, pretending this was all part of a great camping adventure rather than the last resort it actually was. Night brought challenges Rebecca hadn't fully considered. The darkness was absolute. No streetlights or neighboring windows to provide ambient glow, just the oppressive black of rural night pressing against the cabin's walls. The sounds were different too, creaks and scratches that were probably just the house settling and small animals in the walls, but felt ominous in the unfamiliar dark. Emma curled against her mother in their sleeping bags, Mr. Whiskers tucked between them. "Mommy, I'm scared." "I know, baby, but we're safe here. This is our house now, and nothing's going to hurt us. Promise?" Rebecca held her daughter tighter, making promises she hoped she could keep. "I promise." The next morning arrived with birdsong Rebecca hadn't heard in years, a chorus of species she couldn't name, but that somehow made the whole situation feel slightly less desperate. She left Emma sleeping and walked the property in the early light, trying to see it through eyes other than those of exhausted defeat. 20 acres. The lawyer had mentioned that, but Rebecca hadn't really processed what it meant. From the cabin, the land rolled down toward a small creek, then up again to tree-covered ridges. There were the remains of several outbuildings, some collapsed entirely, others hanging on with the same stubborn determination as the main cabin. And everywhere, wildflowers. Purple lupine and yellow balsam root, red Indian paintbrush, and delicate columbine. Nature reclaiming what humans had abandoned with enthusiastic beauty. Rebecca found herself standing at the mine entrance again, watching water pour endlessly from the dark opening. The sound was different in daylight, less ominous, and more persistent, like a story being told in liquid language she couldn't quite understand. "You planning to go swimming?" Rebecca spun to find an elderly man standing 20 feet away, a walking stick in one hand, and a dog that might have been part wolf at his side. She hadn't heard him approach, which set off alarm bells about isolation and vulnerability. "This is private property," she said, trying for authority while acutely aware she was alone with a stranger in the middle of nowhere. The man raised his free hand in a gesture of peace. I know. Just wanted to see who finally came to claim Leonard's place. I'm Frank Kozak. My property runs along your eastern border. Rebecca relaxed fractionally. Rebecca Torres. Leonard was my grandfather, though I never knew him. Frank studied her with eyes that had clearly seen a lot of years and formed opinions quickly. You got the look of him, around the eyes, and the Torres stubbornness in your stance, I'd bet. He moved closer, his dog staying at his heel with well-trained discipline. So you inherited this mess, did you? My condolences. It's not that bad. The defensive response came automatically, even though Frank was clearly right. It's worse. Frank poked his walking stick toward the mine entrance. That's been flooding for 30 years now. Ruined the whole shaft. Destroyed anything that might have been valuable down there. Turned the property into something nobody wanted to touch. Well, I want to touch it. I want to live here. Frank's expression shifted from curious to concerned. Live here? Lady, there's no power. No water, except that hand pump that'll give you a hernia. The nearest neighbors besides me are 4 miles down the road, and winter here will freeze you solid if that stove isn't working perfectly. I don't have anywhere else to go. The admission came out harder than Rebecca intended. So this is home now, whether it's a mess or not. Frank studied her for a long moment, his craggy face working through calculations. Rebecca couldn't read. Finally, he nodded. Stubborn and desperate. That's a combination that either saves you or kills you, no middle ground. He turned to leave, then paused. I'll bring some firewood by later. That pile you've got won't last a week. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Leonard was a friend, long time ago. Figure I owe him at least that much. Frank and his dog disappeared back into the trees, leaving Rebecca standing by the mine entrance with more questions than before. Emma emerged from the cabin as Rebecca returned, her hair a rat's nest, and her face creased with sleep. Who was that man? A neighbor. His name is Frank, and he knew your great-grandfather. Is he nice? Rebecca thought about Frank's blunt assessment of their situation and his offer of firewood. I think so. Maybe. The next few days established a rhythm of survival. Rebecca enrolled Emma in the local elementary school, a 40-minute drive each way that meant 4 hours of their day just on transportation. She found part-time work at a nursing home in Silverton, overnight shifts that paid slightly better than her previous position, but meant sleeping in the car between dropping Emma at school and picking her up, then forcing herself awake to work all night. Frank proved true to his word, delivering not just firewood, but practical advice about maintaining the cabin through the approaching autumn. He showed Rebecca how to properly bank the stove for overnight burning, which sections of roof needed immediate attention to prevent winter disaster, and how to identify which of the outbuildings might be salvageable with work. Your grandfather built most of these himself, Frank explained one afternoon while helping Rebecca shore up a section of the cabin's foundation. Leonard was a mining engineer before the war, came back from Europe with a stake he'd saved up, and bought this claim in 1945. The mine was producing then? Rebecca asked, trying to picture a version of this. Property that wasn't defined by water and decay. Produced for nearly 30 years. Nothing huge, but steady. Mostly silver with some copper and a little gold mixed in. Leonard worked it solo mostly. Just him and occasional hired help during busy seasons. Frank hammered a support beam into place with efficient strikes. Then, something changed in the early 70s. He stopped working the mine. Stopped going down there at all from what I heard. Why? Frank shrugged. Never said. Leonard was a private man. Kept his business to himself. By the time the flooding started in the 90s, he'd already moved to an apartment in Billings. Left the place to rot, basically. Rebecca processed this history, trying to understand why her grandfather would abandon something he'd built. Did he have family? Besides my father, I mean. Just your dad. Far as I know. Torres women tended to die young. from what Leonard told me. His wife passed when your father was a teenager, and after that, it was just the two of them. Frank's expression darkened. There was trouble between them, though. Something happened, and your father left. Leonard never talked about it, but you could see it ate at him. The pieces of a story Rebecca didn't know assembled themselves into a picture of loneliness and regret. Her grandfather, working this mine alone, raising a son alone, dying alone with nothing to show for his life, but a flooded hole in the ground and back taxes nobody wanted to pay. That night, after Emma was asleep, and Rebecca sat by the wood stove with a mug of tea made from water she'd boiled, she found herself drawn to exploring the cabin more thoroughly. Most of the furniture had been removed or had disintegrated, but one room contained an old desk, its drawers swollen with moisture, but still intact. In the bottom drawer, underneath yellowed newspapers from 1972, Rebecca found a leather journal. The cover was water-stained and cracked, but the interior pages had survived relatively intact, filled with precise handwriting in faded blue ink. The 15th of April 1971. Paid off the last of the equipment loans today. The mine's running clean, producing steady. After 26 years, I'm finally in the black, with money to spare. Should feel like victory, but all I can think about is showing someone who cares, and there's nobody. Rebecca turned pages, finding entries spanning decades, a chronicle of her grandfather's work and gradual isolation. He wrote about ore grades and shaft extensions, about the seasons changing on the property, about missing his wife with an ache that never seemed to diminish. But it was an entry from September 1973 that made Rebecca stop cold. Found something today that changes everything. Was clearing a collapse in the western chamber when my lamp caught a reflection. At first I thought it was just mica or quartz, but then I saw the edge of the container. Dug it out carefully, afraid it would crumble, but the seal held. Inside, more than I can count. More than I can believe. Someone hid a fortune down there, probably during the original operation in the 1,880 seconds. And nobody's found it since. I sealed the chamber back up, covered my tracks. Until I understand what this means, it stays between me and the mountain. Rebecca's hands trembled as she read the entry again, then flipped frantically through subsequent pages. But Leonard never mentioned the discovery again. At least not directly. His entries became shorter, more cryptic, filled with references to the question and the decision, without ever explaining what either meant. The journal ended abruptly in June 1975, the last entry simply stating, "Some things are better left buried. History can keep its secrets." Rebecca sat in the flickering light of the wood stove, her mind racing. Her grandfather had found something valuable in the mine, something significant enough to make him stop working, to seal away whatever chamber he'd discovered, to never mention it again. And then the flooding had started, 20 years after he'd sealed that chamber, burying whatever secrets he'd hidden beneath thousands of gallons of water. The next morning, Rebecca drove Emma to school, and then, instead of sleeping in the car as usual, went to the Silverton Public Library. The historical section was small but well maintained, and the librarian, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, proved eager to help. "I'm researching the mining history around Copper Ridge," Rebecca explained, "particularly the Torres claim, early operations through the present." The librarian's expression brightened. "Oh, the old Torres mine. That's quite a history. Let me pull some things for you." What followed was 3 hours of intensive research that painted a picture Rebecca hadn't expected. The original claim had been filed in 1883 by a group of investors from San Francisco, part of the silver rush that had brought thousands to Montana in the late 19th century. The mine had produced reasonably well through the 1,890 seconds before a series of collapses and a drop in silver prices had forced its closure in 1901. But here's where it got interesting. According to newspaper accounts from the time, There had been rumors of a significant find just before the mine closed. Workers had supposedly discovered a cache of rare coins in one of the deeper chambers, possibly hidden by earlier miners or even by indigenous peoples who had used the area long before white settlement. The mine owners had denied the rumors, and the story had faded into local legend, the kind of tale old-timers told over drinks about lost treasures that probably never existed. Rebecca made copies of everything relevant, her mind connecting dots that might be nothing but felt like something. Leonard had found a container in a sealed chamber. The original mine had rumors of hidden coins, and now all of it was underwater, inaccessible, and probably destroyed. Or was it? She drove back to the cabin with a plan forming. Desperate, and probably stupid. But she'd already proven that desperate and stupid were her specialties. Emma bounded out of school with news about her day. About a new friend named Sophie, and a spelling test she'd aced. And Rebecca made appropriate responses while her brain calculated logistics. Frank was waiting at the cabin when they arrived, his truck parked beside the mine entrance. "Been looking at your water situation," he said without preamble. "Got a thought you're not gonna like. Try me. I've gotten good at not liking things." Frank pointed to the mine entrance. "That water's coming from somewhere deep. Probably a shift in an underground spring that broke through into the mine shaft. It's been flowing for 30 years, which means whatever's down there is fully flooded now. I know that. What you maybe don't know is that flooding like this usually stabilizes after a while. The pressure equalizes. The flow reaches an equilibrium." Frank studied the water pouring from the entrance. "I'd bet good money that the water level down there hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. It's just circulating through, not continuing to fill." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. So theoretically, if someone wanted to explore the mine, they'd be dealing with a set water level rather than something that's still actively flooding? Theoretically. But that someone would be insane. The timbers are probably rotted. The whole thing could collapse. And even if it didn't, you'd be swimming through black water in pitch dark with no idea what's down there. Frank's expression was stern. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." But Rebecca was thinking. More than thinking, she was planning. That night, after Emma was asleep, she pulled out Leonard's journal again, reading through every entry with new focus. He'd mentioned the western chamber, a collapse that he'd cleared to reach the discovery. If the mine layout matched typical designs from that era, the western chamber would have been part of the original 19th century workings, deeper than Leonard's own excavations. She pulled up geological surveys and old mine records online, her ancient laptop wheezing under the demand. The Torres mine had 3 main shafts extending from the primary entrance, with various side chambers excavated over the years. The western section had been part of the earliest operations, worked extensively in the 1,890 seconds before being largely abandoned when richer veins were found elsewhere. If Leonard had found something there, something valuable enough to seal away and never speak of again, it would be in that western chamber. Underwater now, yes, but potentially still accessible if someone was brave enough or desperate enough to try. Rebecca knew which category she fell into. The next day was Saturday, which meant no school and an opportunity to act on impulses that seemed increasingly less insane the more she considered them. She drove to a sporting goods store in Billings, 90 minutes away, and purchased diving equipment with money she couldn't afford to spend. A wetsuit, waterproof flashlight, rope, and an underwater camera. The clerk looked at her purchases with professional curiosity. "Planning some cave diving?" "Something like that." "You certified?" "Cave diving's no joke. I took a course in college." This was true, though that course had been in tropical water with professional instructors and zero chance of unstable mineshaft collapse. But certification was certification, right? Back at the cabin, Rebecca hid the equipment in one of the outbuildings, not ready to explain to Emma or Frank what she was planning. She spent the evening researching mine safety, cave diving protocols, and probably reading her own obituary and stories about people who'd tried similar stupid things and died in dark water. But she also researched rare coin values, particularly those from the 1882 and earlier. If Leonard had found a cache from that era, and if the rumors about the original mine discovery were true, the value could be extraordinary. Rare coins from the Western expansion could sell for thousands each, and a cache of them, dozens or hundreds, could represent millions. It was a long shot. More than a long shot, it was a desperate fantasy by a woman who was out of options and hanging her hopes on a water-damaged journal and local legend. But long shots were all Rebecca had left. Sunday morning, she told Emma they were going on a special adventure, but that she needed to stay with Frank for a few hours. Emma's eyes narrowed with 7-year-old suspicion. What kind of adventure that I can't come on? A boring grown-up kind. But I promise we'll do something fun this afternoon, okay? Frank was less easily managed. He took one look at Rebecca's expression and crossed his arms. What are you planning? Something stupid. How stupid? The kind where you might need to know that if I'm not back in 3 hours, there's a problem. Frank's face darkened. You're going into the mine. I'm going into the mine. That's not stupid. That's suicidal. Rebecca, those shafts could collapse. The water could be contaminated. You could get trapped or disoriented or drown in the dark, and nobody would even know where to find your body. I'm aware of all those possibilities. I'm doing it anyway. They stood in tense silence, wills clashing in the morning sun. Finally, Frank sighed. Your grandfather was stubborn too. Got him into trouble more times than I can count. He walked to his truck and pulled out a coil of high-test rope. Tie this around your waist. I'll hold the other end from here. If you tug twice, I pull you out, whether you're done or not. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm enabling idiocy. Just try not to die, because I'm too old to explain to that little girl why her mother thought swimming in a death trap was a good idea. Rebecca suited up in the wetsuit, feeling the neoprene compress against her skin with strange comfort. She attached the waterproof flashlight to her wrist, secured the rope around her waist, and tested the underwater camera. Everything worked, which was both reassuring and terrifying, because it meant she was actually doing this. The mine entrance loomed before her, water pouring steadily from the dark opening. Rebecca had never been afraid of tight spaces or darkness, but she'd also never voluntarily swum into a flooded mine shaft where anything could happen. Western chamber, she muttered to herself. Find the western chamber, look for sealed sections, don't die. She waded into the water at the mine entrance, the cold hitting her even through the wetsuit. The current was stronger than expected, pushing against her as she moved deeper. The entrance shaft extended about 20 feet, before opening into what had been the main working chamber, now a vast pool of dark water. Rebecca dove under, her flashlight cutting a narrow beam through murky darkness. The visibility was terrible, maybe 3 feet at best. Sediment and mineral deposits turning the water into a shifting curtain that constantly threatened to swallow the light. The main chamber was larger than she'd expected, the ceiling extending up beyond her light's reach, support timbers visible like giant ribs. Holding back the mountain's weight, she swam carefully, acutely aware of the rope trailing behind her, of Frank at the other end, holding her lifeline. According to the old mine maps, the western shaft would branch off to the left from the main chamber. Rebecca found it after several minutes of careful exploration. A darker opening in the darkness, water flowing through with subtle current. She hesitated at the entrance. This was the point of no return. Once she entered the shaft, the water around her would be unmoving, the space confined, the possibilities for disaster exponentially higher. The smart choice was to turn back, to accept that whatever Leonard had found was gone, destroyed by 30 years of water and time. But Rebecca had stopped making smart choices the day she decided. Moving to a collapsing cabin was better than admitting defeat. She entered the western shaft. The space closed around her immediately, walls within arm's reach on both sides, the ceiling lowering until she had to hunch to fit. Her breathing sounded impossibly loud through the regulator, each inhale a reminder of how dependent she was on equipment that could fail at any moment. The shaft extended 30 feet, 40, 50. Rebecca checked her watch, calculating how much air she had left, how long before Frank would pull the rope. She needed to move faster, but rushing in a space like this was suicide. And then the shaft opened into another chamber. Rebecca's flashlight swept the space, revealing a room maybe 15 feet across, the ceiling arching above her in a dome that suggested this had been a natural formation the original miners had expanded. The walls showed tool marks, the systematic excavation of people looking for silver that might or might not have existed. But it was the far wall that made Rebecca's heart stop. Stone blocks, too regular to be natural, stacked across what had once been another passage. Not original mine work, but something added later. Someone had deliberately sealed this section, probably decades after the mine closed. Leonard's handiwork. It had to be. Rebecca swam closer, examining the blocks with her flashlight. They'd been fitted carefully but not mortared, simply stacked with enough weight to stay in place and prevent casual exploration. After 30 years underwater, some had shifted, creating gaps between them. Rebecca reached for the camera, documenting everything before she did anything else. This moment needed to be recorded, evidence of what she'd found and what happened next. Then she began carefully removing stones. The blocks were heavier than expected, each one requiring significant effort to lift and push aside. Rebecca worked methodically, creating an opening large enough to swim through, her lungs burning with the exertion despite the regulator's steady supply of air. Behind the wall, the passage continued into another small chamber. And in that chamber, sitting on a natural shelf of rock as if waiting for 80 years to be found, was a metal box. Rebecca's hands shook as she approached it, hardly believing what she was seeing. The box was maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, constructed of what looked like copper that had oxidized green over the decades but remained intact. There was no lock, just a simple hasp that had been bent closed. She documented it with the camera, taking shots from every angle, then carefully worked the hasp open. The lid resisted, corrosion having fused it partially to the body, but with persistent effort, it gave way. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth but was now just disintegrating fabric, were coins. Not just a few, but hundreds, packed carefully in rows, each one gleaming dully in the flashlight beam despite the water and time. Rebecca picked one up with trembling fingers, bringing it close to examine. The date was worn but visible, 1854. The design showed Lady Liberty on one side, an eagle on the other, a gold dollar from before the Civil War, preserved in dark water for longer than anyone still living had been alive. She reached for another coin, then another, finding dates ranging from the 1,840 seconds through the 1,880 seconds. Gold dollars, double eagles, rare mintages that would make collectors weep. The box was packed with them, layer after layer of American history that someone had hidden in this mine chamber and never retrieved. The rumors had been true. The original miners had found something valuable, had hidden it away for reasons lost to time, and Leonard had rediscovered it almost a century later. And rather than take it, rather than disturb what had been hidden, he'd sealed it back up, leaving the disturb choice to whoever came after him. Rebecca's chest tightened, not from the water pressure or the air supply, but from the weight of understanding. Leonard had died poor, had let his property fall into ruin, had accumulated taxes he couldn't pay, all while sitting on a fortune he'd chosen to leave buried. Why? The question would haunt her, but not as much as the question of what to do now. She checked her watch. 20 minutes since entering the mine, which meant Frank would be getting nervous. She needed to make a decision. Take the box now, risk dropping it or losing it in the murky water, or mark the location, and come back with better equipment and planning. The rope around her waist jerked twice. Frank's signal. Time was up. Rebecca took one more photo of the box and its contents, fixing the location in her mind. Then, with reluctance that felt like tearing away a piece of herself, she closed the lid, secured the hasp, and backed out of the chamber. She replaced the stones she removed, working quickly now, aware that Frank would be pulling the rope if she didn't respond soon. The wall wouldn't look exactly as it had, but it would be enough to keep the chamber sealed until she could return properly prepared. Rebecca jerked the rope 3 times, the signal that she was okay and coming out. The return journey felt longer, fighting against the current to exit the western shaft, navigating back through the main chamber, finally emerging into the blessed daylight that hurt her eyes after the absolute darkness below. Frank was there, his face tight with tension that only eased slightly when he saw her. 25 minutes. You said 3 hours, but I was ready to pull you out after 20. Rebecca pulled off her mask, dragging air into lungs that had forgotten what normal breathing felt like. I'm okay. I found something. Found what? Proof that my grandfather wasn't crazy. Proof that there's something down there worth saving. Frank helped her out of the pod. Water, his expression cycling through concern, curiosity, and resignation. You're going back in, aren't you? I have to. But next time, I'll be better prepared. The underwater camera had survived the journey, its memory card full of images that documented everything Rebecca had seen. That night, after Emma was asleep, Rebecca uploaded them to her laptop, examining each photo with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. The coins were clear in the close-up shots, their dates and mint marks visible despite the water and darkness. Rebecca began researching, cross-referencing what she'd found with numismatic databases and auction records. What she discovered made her hands shake all over again. An 1,854 Type II gold dollar in good condition could sell for $2,000 to $5,000, depending on mint mark. But certain rare dates and varieties could bring 10 times that amount. And if the coins were in exceptional condition, preserved by being underwater in a sealed container, the values could be astronomical. The box had contained at least 300 coins that Rebecca had been able to see, probably more in layers she hadn't examined. If the average value was $3,000 per coin, that was nearly $1 million. If some of them were rare dates or pristine condition, if there were double eagles or other denominations mixed in, the value could reach 5 million, 10 million, possibly more. Rebecca sat back from the laptop, her mind struggling to process numbers that seemed fictional. She'd gone into the mine, hoping to find something, anything, that might be valuable enough to solve their immediate problems. What she'd found instead was potentially life-changing wealth, if she could figure out how to retrieve it safely and legally. The legal question loomed large. Were the coins hers? They'd been hidden in a mine her grandfather owned, on property she'd inherited. But they'd been placed there long before Leonard had bought the claim, probably by the original miners in the 1,880 seconds. Did that make them part of the property, or unclaimed treasure that would be subject to different laws? Rebecca needed help, professional help, but admitting what she'd found meant involving others, meant the risk of losing control, of having the authorities decide her fate. She thought of Leonard's journal entry about keeping secrets. Some things are better left buried. But he hadn't destroyed the coins or revealed them to anyone. He'd simply sealed them away, preserving the choice for whoever came next. The choice was hers now. The next morning, Rebecca called in sick to work, the first time she'd done so since starting the nursing home job. She drove to Billings with Emma, taking her daughter to a movie before stopping at the office of Margaret Chen, the attorney who'd handled the inheritance paperwork. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she didn't suffer nonsense gladly. Mrs. Torres, I wasn't expecting to hear from you again. Is there a problem with the property? Not a problem exactly. More of a discovery I need advice about. Over the next hour, Rebecca laid out everything, showing Margaret the photos from the underwater camera, Leonard's journal entries, the historical research about the mine. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing more focused with each new detail. When Rebecca finished, Margaret leaned back in her chair, steeping her fingers. This is extraordinary and complicated. How complicated? Montana law regarding treasure trove is actually fairly straightforward. Generally, if you find something valuable on your own property, it belongs to you. The exception would be if someone can prove prior ownership and never intended to abandon the items. Margaret tapped the photos of the coins. These were clearly placed by someone who intended to retrieve them, but that someone is long dead, probably without heirs who even know the cash existed. After more than a century, any claim of ownership would be effectively impossible to prove. So they're mine? Legally, probably yes. But there are complications. First, you'll need proper recovery methods. If you damage the coins during retrieval, you destroy their value. Second, once you have them, you'll need authentication and appraisal, which means involving experts who will talk. Third, there are tax implications, both federal and state, that will take a significant portion of the value. Margaret pulled out a legal pad, making notes. And most importantly, you'll need to secure the site immediately. If word gets out about this discovery before you've legally established your claim and recovered the items, you could have treasure hunters, thieves, or legal challenges that complicate everything. Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on her shoulders. She'd gone into the mine on an impulse, chasing a desperate hope. Now she was facing a process that would require careful planning, professional assistance, and resources she didn't have. I can't afford experts or security or any of this, she admitted. I'm barely keeping the electricity on. Well, I would be if I had electricity. Margaret studied her with an expression that might have been sympathy or respect, or both. You have collateral now. The property's value just increased exponentially, and that means banks will loan against it. I can connect you with people who specialize in situations like this, recovery experts, and numismatic professionals who work on contingency for significant fines. What kind of contingency? Typically, 10 to 20% of the recovered value, plus expenses. It's not cheap, but it means you don't pay anything up front, and they have incentive to maximize the coin's value. Rebecca did the math in her head. If the coins were worth $5 million, losing 20% plus expenses still left her with over $3 million. More money than she could imagine. Enough to transform not just her life but Emma's future. Enough to finally stop running from bills and fear. How long would this take? From securing the site to final sale? 6 months to a year, probably. These processes don't move quickly, and you want them done right to maximize value and minimize legal challenges. 6 months to a year. Rebecca thought of the collapsing cabin, the approaching winter, Emma's education being disrupted by instability. Could they hold on that long? She thought of Leonard, who'd held on for decades, keeping the secret until he died, passing the choice to someone he'd never known. Let's do it, Rebecca said. Whatever it takes, let's do it right. The process Margaret set in motion moved faster than Rebecca expected. Within a week, she'd been connected with Jake Morrison, a recovery specialist who'd worked on shipwrecks and treasure caches around the world. He arrived at the cabin with a team of 3 professional divers and engineers who examined the mine. Entrance with experienced eyes. The flooding actually worked in your favor, Jake explained after his initial assessment. It kept the chamber sealed and the coins protected from air exposure that would have caused additional corrosion. The recovery itself will be delicate, but straightforward if we do it carefully. Jake's team spent 2 days setting up equipment, installing underwater lighting in the mine shaft, running safety lines, and creating a pumping system that wouldn't disturb sediment but would improve visibility. Rebecca watched from the entrance, feeling simultaneously relieved that professionals were handling it, and oddly protective of the discovery she'd made alone in the dark. On the third day, Jake brought up the first coins. They emerged from the mine entrance in sealed containers, transferred immediately to a humidity-controlled case Jake had brought specifically for this purpose. In daylight, properly lit and visible, the coins were breathtaking. Gold gleamed, despite oxidation, details sharp on specimens that had been preserved by darkness and water. Jake held up an 1,850 double eagle, a $20 gold piece with an eagle on the reverse. His hands were gentle, reverent. This is mint state, maybe MS-64 or higher. In this condition, at auction, this single coin could bring $30,000. Rebecca felt her knees weaken. How many like that? We won't know until we've recovered and catalogued everything. But from what I saw down there, you're looking at several dozen double eagles, at least $200 gold, and some specimens I couldn't identify without closer examination. Jake's eyes gleamed with professional excitement. Mrs. Torres, this is one of the most significant cash finds I've worked on. Conservative estimate. You're looking at $20 to $30 million. If some of these are rare varieties or better condition than expected, the value could be substantially higher. $20 to $30 million. Rebecca sat down on the ground, not caring about mud or dignity. Emma, who'd been playing nearby with Frank's dog, ran over with alarm. Mommy, are you okay? Did you hurt yourself? Rebecca pulled her daughter onto her lap, holding her tight, while the world rearranged itself around them. I'm fine, baby. More than fine. We're going to be okay. The recovery took 5 days. Jake's team worked carefully, bringing up the coins in batches, documenting everything with photos and video, cataloging each specimen as it emerged. Rebecca watched, helping where she could, learning about numismatics and preservation from people who dedicated their lives to this work. On the evening of the 5th day, Jake made his final ascent, carrying a smaller container that he'd saved for last. He opened it on the cabin's porch, revealing a dozen coins different from the others. I wanted to show you these separately, he said, his voice carrying an edge of awe. These aren't just rare. These are museum-quality specimens that maybe a dozen collectors worldwide could afford to bid on. He held up a coin that glowed with a purity that seemed almost unnatural. $1,849 gold. The first year they were minted. This appears to be proof quality, which means it was specially made for presentation or testing. There are maybe 5 of these known to exist in private hands. He set it down carefully. Current market value for something like this would be $500,000, maybe more. He showed her the others. An 1,854S double eagle from the San Francisco Mint, struck in the height of the gold rush. An 1,861 Paquet reverse double eagle, one of the rarest coin designs in American history. A complete set of Liberty Head gold dollars from the 1,852, each in pristine condition. These 12 coins alone are worth more than $5 million, Jake said quietly. The full cash, once authenticated and graded, will probably exceed $40 million. Rebecca couldn't speak. The number was too large to process, too disconnected from the reality of her life. She'd been worried about affording Emma's school supplies 2 months ago. Now, she was being told she had $40 million in rare coins that had been waiting in darkness for 140 years. Frank appeared beside her, his weathered hand resting on her shoulder. Leonard knew. That's why he sealed it away. $40 million would have changed him, changed his life in ways he didn't want. So he left it for someone else, someone who might need it more. That night, after the team had secured everything and Emma was asleep, Rebecca sat on the cabin's porch with Leonard's journal, reading through entries she'd memorized but needed to revisit. Some things are better left buried. History can keep its secrets. But he hadn't destroyed the coins or made them impossible to find. He'd simply put the decision in someone else's hands, trusting that whoever came next would know what to do. Rebecca thought about the desperation that had brought her here, about standing in the rain outside her apartment, wondering where they'd sleep that night, about Emma's confusion and fear as their life collapsed around them, about the journey from rock bottom to this moment, sitting on a porch that was finally starting to feel like home, with a fortune in rare coins secured in a professional case inside. Leonard hadn't left her money. He'd left her a choice. And she'd made it by diving into dark water with nothing but hope and a waterproof flashlight. The authentication process took 6 weeks. Jake arranged for the coins to be evaluated by 3 separate grading services, each one confirming what he'd suspected. This was the most significant cache of early American gold coins found in over 50 years, with specimens that museums and private collectors would compete fiercely to acquire. During this time, Rebecca's life continued to transform. Margaret worked with banks to secure a loan against the verified value of the coins, enough to properly restore the cabin, install electricity and plumbing, and purchase a reliable vehicle. Rebecca quit her nursing home job, though she promised to return as a volunteer once things settled. Emma's school reports improved dramatically, now that she wasn't being shuttled between locations, and her mother wasn't exhausted 24/7. She made friends, joined activities, started talking about wanting to learn to play piano. Normal childhood concerns from a kid who hadn't had normalcy in years. But it was the unexpected visitor who arrived one Tuesday morning that forced Rebecca to confront the human implications of her discovery. The woman who knocked on the cabin door was in her 70s, elegant despite casual clothes, with silver hair and eyes that held both hope and hesitation. "I'm looking for Rebecca Torres. My name is Helen Cartwright, and I believe we need to talk about some coins you found." Rebecca invited her in, instantly wary. Margaret had warned that people would come out of the woodwork claiming connections to the cache, looking for pieces of sudden wealth. Helen sat at the kitchen table, accepting tea with hands that trembled slightly. "I don't want your coins, if that's what you're worried about. I just want to know if something specific was among them." She pulled out an old photograph, faded but clear, showing a young couple in 1940s clothing. The man was tall and lean, the woman beautiful with the kind of open smile that suggested she laughed easily. On the back, written in fountain pen, "Thomas and Catherine, engaged, April 1949. This is my mother," Helen said, indicating the woman. Catherine Cartwright. She was engaged to Thomas Bennett, a mining engineer who worked in this area after the war. They were supposed to be married in the fall of 1949. Her voice caught. Thomas went into the Torres mine in August of that year, working on a geological survey. There was a collapse. They never found his body. Rebecca felt a chill run through her. Leonard's earliest journal entries were from the mid-1940s, when he'd first acquired the mine. Helen continued, her words heavy with decades-old grief. "Before he died, Thomas wrote my mother a letter. He'd found something in the mine, something valuable that he was going to use for their future. He said he'd hidden it in a safe place until he could figure out the right way to handle it." She met Rebecca's eyes. "My mother spent 50 years wondering if Thomas's death was somehow connected to that discovery, if someone had killed him for it, or if he'd died trying to hide it away." Rebecca's throat felt tight. "Did your mother ever learn what he'd found?" "No, and she died in 2003 still wondering. But right before she passed, she made me promise to keep asking questions if I ever heard of valuable finds near the old Torres mine." Helen gestured to the photograph. "So when I read about your discovery in the Mining Journal article, I had to come." Rebecca got up and retrieved one of the authentication reports. the one that included detailed descriptions of the most valuable coins. She handed it to Helen, watching the older woman's eyes scan the technical language. "These are from the 1,840 seconds and 50 seconds, Helen said, her voice uncertain. If Thomas found them in 1949, they'd already been hidden for decades. Yes, which means he didn't steal them or murder anyone for them. He found something that had been lost for over half a century, and rather than taking it immediately, he died before deciding what to do." Helen's eyes filled with tears. She never believed he abandoned her, even when everyone said a young man with that much money would have run away to start over somewhere else. She insisted something terrible had happened, that he'd loved her too much to just disappear. Rebecca took Helen's hand gently. "Your mother was right. Thomas found the coins, and for whatever reason, he sealed them back into a hidden chamber. Maybe he was planning to and report them officially, or maybe he was protecting them until he could figure out the legal implications. We'll never know. But he didn't abandon your mother. He died before he could marry her." The tears fell freely now. "Thank you for finding them. Yes, but more for giving me this answer to bring to her grave. It's been 75 years, but it matters." After Helen left, Rebecca sat on the porch, processing the encounter. The coins weren't just objects with monetary value. They were pieces of human stories, of decisions made, and lives altered by choices around wealth and secrecy. Thomas Bennett had found them, and chosen to hide them again, dying before revealing what he'd discovered. Leonard had found them, and made the same choice, sealing them away for someone else to decide about. And now they were hers, with all the responsibility that implied. The auction was scheduled for December, handled by a prestigious house that specialized in rare coins and attracted wealthy collectors worldwide. Jake and Margaret both advised selling the collection as a single lot to maximize competitive bidding, though Rebecca had the option of keeping certain pieces if she wanted. She thought about this seriously. Did she want to keep any of the coins? They were beautiful, historically significant, tangible links to the past and to her grandfather's secret choices. In the end, Rebecca kept just one, the $1,849 gold dollar that Jake had identified as proof quality. She had it professionally mounted in a secure case with a plaque that read, "Found November 2023, Torres Mine, Montana." Part of a cache hidden circa 1,880 seconds, discovered and sealed away by Leonard Torres in 1973, recovered by his granddaughter Rebecca Torres. Sometimes, the greatest wealth is choosing what to do with it. The auction generated international attention. Museums competed with private collectors, each bidding driving the price higher than projections. When the final hammer fell, the complete cache had sold for $47.3 million, a record for a private treasure find in North America. After Jake's contingency fee, Margaret's legal costs, taxes, and various other expenses, Rebecca cleared $31.2 million, an amount that would have been impossible to comprehend 8 months ago when she'd stood in the rain, holding an inheritance letter about a flooded mine shaft. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Rebecca worked with financial advisors to structure the windfall responsibly, setting up trusts for Emma's education and future, establishing a foundation to support single parents in crisis, and investing the bulk in diversified holdings that would generate sustainable income. But she also kept the cabin, properly restored now with every modern convenience, while maintaining its historical character. The property became their home, not a desperate refuge, but a chosen place with room for Emma to grow and space for Rebecca to finally breathe. Frank received a new truck and funds for his own property improvements. Gifts he initially refused, until Rebecca pointed out that Leonard would have wanted it. "Stubborn old fool probably saved that money for me," Frank grumbled, but his eyes were wet when he accepted. The nursing home where Rebecca had worked got a new wing dedicated to patient comfort and staff support, funded by an anonymous donation they would have traced back to her if she'd let them. The town of Silverton got improvements to its elementary school, including a music program that Emma joined enthusiastically, learning piano like she'd dreamed about, and Helen Cartwright got a scholarship fund in her mother's name, supporting young women studying geology and mining engineering, a legacy for Catherine Bennett, who'd waited 50 years for a fiancé who'd died in the dark. 6 months after the auction, on a spring day that felt like a gift after Montana's brutal winter, Rebecca stood at the mine entrance with Emma. The water still poured out, constant and eternal, but now it was just water, not a symbol of failure or an obstacle to survival. Great-grandpa Leonard hid treasure down there, Emma asked, staring at the dark opening with 7-year-old wonder. He found treasure down there, Rebecca corrected gently. Then he chose to leave it for us to find when we needed it most. Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. That was nice of him. Even though we never met. Especially because we never met. He trusted that whoever came next would know what to do with it. Did we do it right? Rebecca thought about the foundation helping families in crisis, about Emma's secure future, about the restored cabin and the scholarship fund, and all the ways the coins had rippled outward to touch lives beyond just their own. I think we did our best, and I think that's all he wanted. They walked back to the cabin together, Emma chattering about school and friends and the camping trip Frank had promised to take them on when summer arrived. Normal concerns from a normal childhood, the kind Rebecca had feared Emma would never have. Inside, Rebecca paused at the mantel, where the preserved gold dollar sat in its case, catching sunlight through the newly installed windows. Sometimes she thought about the people who'd originally hidden those coins, about their reasons and hopes, and whether they'd intended to come back for them. She thought about Thomas Bennett finding them and choosing secrecy, dying before revealing his discovery. She thought about Leonard holding the secret for decades, sealing the chamber and walking away, trusting time and fate to put the choice in better hands. And she thought about herself, desperate and drowning, diving into dark water on nothing but hope and a grandfather's cryptic journal. Some things are better left buried, Leonard had written. History can keep its secrets, but history had secrets worth finding too, not just the coins themselves, but the truth they revealed about choice and character, about what people did when confronted with sudden wealth and difficult decisions. The coins had been hidden in darkness for over a century, waiting through generations of lives lived in ignorance of their existence. And then a single mother with nowhere else to go had found them at the exact moment she needed them most. Magic or chance, destiny or dumb luck. Rebecca would never know which, but it didn't matter, because the result was the same. She'd inherited a flooded mine shaft everyone said was worthless. She'd found a fortune everyone said was impossible, and she'd chosen to honor both the discovery and the grandfather who'd preserved it by using the wealth to build something lasting, something that would ripple forward through time like the coins had rippled back through history. Outside, Emma's laughter carried through the open window, pure and untroubled, the sound of childhood as it should be. Frank's deeper voice responded, probably teaching her something practical, about nature or survival, or the value of keeping promises. Rebecca touched the gold dollar's case one more time, a prayer of gratitude to a grandfather she'd never known, then went to join her daughter in the sunshine. The mine entrance still poured its endless water into the creek, washing clean the path where something valuable had once been hidden. The secret was out now, the treasure recovered, the story told. But some secrets, the important ones, remained buried in the best possible way. The kind of person Leonard Torres had been, the reasons he'd chosen to seal away wealth instead of taking it, the faith he'd placed in an unknown granddaughter he'd never meet. Those secrets would stay with Rebecca, shaping how she raised Emma, how she used the wealth, how she honored the legacy of a man who'd valued choice above fortune. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you choose to do with it. And sometimes, a flooded mine shaft everyone mocked turns out hold not just rare coins worth millions, but proof that even in darkness and desperation, hope can lead you to exactly what you need to survive. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.